Alright, so over this past week, OWCS China set its challengers to be sent to the global stage. We saw FaceIt Masters Season 4 reach its conclusion and lead into promo and relegation. And then to top it off, we also got the SOOP Cup, which heated things up in a big way. Hey folks, my name is Apostle, and this is Watching Overwatch, also known as WoW, the show that covers everything you need to know about what's been going on in the world of Overwatch Esports. Now, right now, most of our big names are kind of keeping their heads down and grinding to be ready for the Champions Clash, but thankfully, we're getting plenty of amazing action outside of that. And honestly, these games seem to be providing a great look into what kind of things we might be able to expect in said Champions Clash, and things are looking super exciting. As always though, we'll begin today with the must-watch matches. First off, in the SOOP Cup, and casted by your two favorite EXO creators, New Era versus Alt-Tab, an amazing match that was actually kind of described perfectly by the names of the two teams we had there. Next, coming from OWCS China, check out Team CC versus Little Sheep, which I think was a great match to showcase two of the potentially top 4 teams there in China. And finally, check out the finals of our FaceIt Master Leagues, as those are both teams that played in promotion and relegation matches and maybe even OWCS, but not gonna spoil that quite yet. Either way though, the sooner you learn about those players, the better it'll be for you. Now, to start things off, let's talk about what happened there in OWCS China. So starting off with our first game there, we got Little Sheep versus Blade, which was actually a very close match between two teams that happen to be fully Chinese. And that's actually a pretty significant statistic when you consider that half the top 8 of China does have imports just filled with Koreans, right? Now at this point, you're probably familiar with the great Chinese throw-off between Blade and Rock Esports. And at that point, it was a bit hard to tell how good Blade actually was. But I think in this game, they showed that when they're taking things seriously, they do have a lot of potential there. Unfortunately, despite that potential, Little Sheep was just a bit stronger throughout the series, eventually finishing with a full hold to end up capping things out. Next up, we got Team XX versus Rock Esports. Now, personally, I was hoping it'd be close, considering that Team XX did actually get second back in Pro Chaser Season 3, but unfortunately, things didn't go the way that I'm sure they had planned at least, as Rock ended up stomping on every map. XX just did not get a point outside of push. In the semifinals though, that's when our group leaders made their first appearances, starting with Team CC versus Little Sheep. Now, Little Sheep was a little bit of a question mark here, given it's a team made up of some of the best Chinese rookie names, but I think they proved themselves more than capable here against Team CC, which was a roster filled with veterans. Team CC did ultimately end up winning this game 3-1, but each map was very close all things considered, and I think the players of Little Sheep did a great job matching up to their counterparts. On the other side though, we got Once Again versus Rock Esports. And there, once again, gave us a statement win, as they gave Rock a beatdown pretty similar to the treatment XX got. Outside of Blizzard World, Rock got shut out, getting 0 points and even 0 meters compared to Once Again's full cap there on Esperanza. Rock's next game had them face off against Little Sheep there in the 3rd place match, and fortunately they were able to bounce back there with a 3-0. It kind of sucks a little that the format meant there was no room for a lower comeback, especially because Dia and Molly, they're legends of their own right there in the Chinese scene, right? So I'm sure we'd love to see those guys have success. But that does bring us to our grand finals, where we got Team CC versus Once Again. And by making the grand finals, it got locked in that these would be the two teams who will be representing the region in the Champions Clash. In this meeting though, Once Again utterly gapped Team CC, getting a 4-0 there in the finals. The first 2 maps were just all Once Again, and thankfully things did get a bit closer after the halftime, but at that point, it felt like the match was already just well decided. I know it can be annoying to have like a sweep grand finals, but you know, for fans of Once Again, I'm sure they were happy to see the team show that they're kind of still the best of the best in that region, since, you know, to be honest, anything less than that, I think would be a bit of a worrying look as you go into the Champions Clash, right? To be competitive with the best from around the world, you definitely need to be capable of a statement win like that, and they really showed it here. All that being said though, while Team CC were definitely a bit weaker, they showed some great spirit, and with more time to grind, I think they'll definitely be able to live up to the potential that they have on their roster. Given that, like, if we consider Once Again as kind of the reincarnation of Spark, Team CC is kind of the reincarnation of Chengdu. So we'll just have to wait and see how these kind of reborn legends can handle the action there at the Champions Clash. Now, moving on to stuff that may be a bit more local, let's talk about the FaceIt Master Leagues for both EMEA and NA. And of course, along with that, the promotion and relegation matches that came out of it. We did touch a bit on this stuff in the last episode, but now we have the full picture. So let's start with North America. First, in our upper bracket finals, we saw two dark horses in Rad Academy and Dildux, each coming off fresh wins over the two top teams from the regular season. But after a heated back and forth, it was the Ducklings who stood strong, winning the map 5 to secure their ticket for a chance for promotion. Then in the lower, those aforementioned top two teams from the regular season ended up meeting there in the lower bracket. And while people expected these guys to face off, we definitely weren't expecting it to be there of all places. That being said, Supernova was able to show their perfect season. It was no fluke. They ended up knocking out Extinction with a 3-1 win to stay alive. Then came the rematch between Supernova and Rad, and with Rad being the ones who sent Supernova to the lower bracket, this looked like it would be a nail-biter, but Supernova came back with a vengeance and took out Radicad in a 3-0 to join Dildux there in the grand finals. And once up there, Dildux tried their best, but Supernova ultimately took the win 4-1. In all honesty, this was a pretty important win for Supernova, especially when you consider they got knocked into the lower bracket so early. It was maybe a little worrying, right? But thankfully they maintained their composure and they came back looking better than ever, solidifying themselves as the FaceIt Season 4 champions. Of course, though, they couldn't afford to rest on their laurels, since next came the OWCS Promotion and Relegation. And for North America, this would start by facing off against Shikigami and Amplify. Our first match ended up being an intense map 5 between Shikigami and the Dildux, with Shikigami finding the edge to move on there in the bracket. Next, Supernova got off to a very hot start, beating Amplify with a quick 3-0 and sending them down to the lower. And it's here that, unfortunately, Amplify's strength finally gave out, as they ended up losing to Dildux in a 3-0. Definitely unfortunate for them, and I'm sure they would have loved to kind of stay alive a little longer, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Back up in the upper though, Supernova continued to just kind of burn a warpath, as Shikigami ended up also being taken out in a 3-0. So just to recap, Supernova became the FaceIt champs with 4-1, and then qualified to OWCS without dropping a single map. That's a pretty sick showing from them. Now, unfortunately for Shikigami, it seems like that match ended up booming them just a little bit, as their lifeline to OWCS meant beating Dildux. But it was the Ducks who found a 3-0 of their own, and in turn, snagged the second spot and qualified for Stage 2 as well. For Supernova, we can't be too surprised to see them back in the spotlight here, given that their absence in Stage 1 I think was considered kind of a total curveball at the time. Like, looking at last year, the Fluffy Dreamland core proved themselves time and time again, so I'm sure having them back up there in the top teams will be very exciting for the region. As for the Dildux though, this team is the definition of lovable underdogs, and arguably may end up as even a better story than Amplify and Shikigami. While we're definitely going to feel the absence of those two teams, they will be missed, Dildux is a completely orgless team. There's no owner, no money, just pure passion. And in fact, PDK, the hitscan player who locked them in, he originally joined that team just to be the manager and just ended up playing for them and popping off. Their passion is just undeniable, and now they've proved that they have the skill to back it up, so we'll definitely be hoping to see how those guys can handle the big stage. Now, over in EMEA, we did have a bit of a wrench thrown into things with certain results, but overall, it was a pretty reasonable set of results. The biggest surprise we got was Arrayus beating O907, considering O907 came into this as the 3rd seed to Arrayus at 8, but a dominant 3-0 from Arrayus means that this might be the biggest upset of the bracket. Unfortunately, their upset potential wasn't quite enough to beat the number 1 seed of TA, as they did lose that match in a 1-3. Considering their last face-off against TA though was a 3-0, it's a small silver lining that they got a map. Now, back in the upper, Frosttails was able to beat Quick Esports with a 3-1, with the former D'Ampero roster proving that their regular season results are in fact worth trusting. After all, they were second only to TA with a 13-2 record to Quick's 11-4. But for Quick Esports, that loss just did something to them, as they went down to face the number 1 seed there in the lower, and they found a 3-0 win against them. And it was dominant by all accounts, with TA only managing to take a single point. Quick Esports did their homework perfectly, and with basically perfect counterplays, they just secured their spot there in the grand finals. So that gave us the rematch between Frosttails and Quick. But this time, Quick continued to show just an insane level up from the last time they faced off, as Quick won the grand finals 4-1 and looked absolutely incredible in their process. They really lived up to the name Quick with the adaptations they had in store for Frosttails, and their team play and macro was just incredible. And of course, while Quick did become the FaceIt Season 4 champs of EMEA, both those teams did get to move on to the promotion and relegation. The two teams would face off against Vision Esports and Sakura Esports, the bottom two of OWCS Stage 1. And Frosttails was the first to step to the plate over there against Vision. Now, while Frost took a close map 3, it was all Vision outside of that, which frankly was pretty surprising considering Vision were still nerfed here by their lack of a tank player. They still had Simple, the flex support, there playing the tank for them, but he did kind of just go sicko mode on Hazard, and it was enough to blindside Frosttails. Match 2 saw Quick and Sakura, but Quick was able to dispatch Sakura pretty handily in a 3-1, just continuing to roll with that momentum they had coming in from FaceIt, and really showing some incredible skill when it comes to figuring out what makes their opponents tick, then making sure they're ready to counter it. Unfortunately, things didn't get much easier for Sakura as they had to go against Frosttails next, and that was yet another 3-1 scoreline in favor of FTE. Unfortunately, as Sakura got eliminated here, it really felt like this was just another page of the story that we saw all season from them, right? They always would start strong in the first couple maps, but the more a series went on, the more they would get stomped. And with Frosttails ending the match with a full cap on Runasapi, it was just the nail in the coffin. Very talented players there, to be sure, but unfortunately not quite on the same level in terms of coordination. Now back up in the upper with Vision versus Quick, we kind of got some shenanigans, for lack of a better word, starting from Vision. For some reason, they did not show up to the start of the match and ended up forfeiting map 1 as a result, which gave a free point to Quick. And for Vision, that was kind of the beginning of the end for them. When they got back, Quick used a Hazard ban to force Simple off his comfort pick there on the tank, and with him on the more main tanks, Vision looked a little lost. They did make the final map pretty close, but the damage was done at that point, and Quick qualified into OWCS with a 3-0. After that loss, Vision was just completely boomed, and in the rematch against Frosttails, it was a completely different story from last time, as Frosttails took another 3-0. Vision put up a fight, at least they didn't roll over and die, but Frost just constantly stayed a step ahead. One could argue that it was just a matter of Frost getting the download from their previous loss, but Vision were clearly not at the same level they had been just a few matches prior. But Vision's issues aside, it does mean that Frosttails ended up securing their spot and will also be in OWCS Stage 2. So with that decided, it actually means that all the FaceIt teams that made it here actually beat out the OWCS teams, and they'll be ready to make their mark there in Stage 2. The promotion and relegation system is looking like a huge success just based off this alone. But of course, the real question now is whether or not they'll be able to flourish in the much tougher tournament. Or will we see them back in the Stage 2 relegation? Well, only time will tell, but it's going to be an exciting journey there for sure. Now, moving on to another very exciting tournament, we had the WDG SOOP Cup happen over the past couple weeks. And this was an incredible tournament that showed off new looks for so many of our Korean teams, as well as some entirely new names, and of course, the guest stars from EMEA and NA. Our bracket started with Vesta Crew, who showed off a whole new roster. They brought in some stars from Japan and Pacific, and lo and behold, it was finally enough to let Vesta Crew put a win up there as they got their 3-2 victory against Please Not Hero Ban. Scarlet on the Genji has been tearing it up for a while, and coming in here, he continued to do so. Please Not Hero Ban showed a ton of character. They still had Uyu on the Wrecking Ball, looking great. It was a super entertaining match, but unfortunately, not quite enough to net them a win. The next game was Onside versus Crayon. And I'm not gonna lie, this one was a little bit of a stomp, with Onside getting a 3-0. But considering Crayon were coming in as a team of basically completely unknown players, they actually looked better than I expected. I especially like the Tracer player whose name translates to, I kid you not, Mercy Princess in a flex rank world. I sincerely hope that they can be the future star of OWCS solely for the casting greatness that will come from that. Now that did lead us to Vesta Crew versus Onside though, and Onside won this 3-1, but Vesta looked pretty solid, honestly. Zessen on Sojourn was playing it pretty close to profit at times, and Scarlet especially, he was actually making Sunjun sweat. Vesta Crew may still be a tier below, but if the revamped roster sticks around, I really think they could have some serious firepower moving forward. On day 2 though, we started things with an absolute banger as we got New Era versus Alt-Tab. Now, this was always going to be a fun match simply because it really was a battle of new versus old. Alt-Tab is a team filled with veterans, and New Era, that's the team that's kind of about like bringing rookies there to the spotlight, right? Ultimately though, Alt-Tab proved that the Unks still got it, as they won this 3-2 off the back of a crazy reverse sweep. Otto in particular really impressed me. Despite getting Genji diffed a bit at the beginning, once he swapped to Tracer, he was doing serious work. And Attack, my goodness, Attack, we haven't seen him since NRG fell apart, but he really just felt like he wanted to put on a legacy game here. From map 3 onward, Attack was a menace to the backline. He was just demolishing MCD and Blink over and over again. He really just kind of took over the game to give Alt-Tab the win from there. On the other side of the bracket though, Poker Face versus An Elite, which was a clean 3-0 for Poker Face. An Elite was similar to Crayon in that they're very much a team of pretty green talent, but they did also have a couple players who we saw in OWCS Pacific and Japan. Unfortunately, the more experienced core of Poker Face was just too strong, and with Heiser able to play his comfort pick of Winston, the dive just kind of dismantled the rookies. Poker Face then ended up continuing their momentum as they made quick work of Alt-Tab, which on paper should have been a much closer match considering how New Era and Poker Face used to trade out games, but Poker Face's dive was just way too strong, they were way too fast, and the old hats got a little bit blitzed. That brought us over to our playoffs though, which is where the big dogs started to make their appearance, beginning with T1 versus Onside. This is another one that I was expecting to be close, but T1 took it 3-0 looking dominant, with Onside being that FTG core that for OWCS Stage 1 finished with a tied record to T1. There was a chance, and no map was a sweep, but T1 just definitely solidified themselves as the stronger team of the two. I've been an FTG believer, but I respect where respect's due. T1 is definitely better now. On the other side, we got Wei versus Poker Face. And of course, that match came with the first reappearance of Top Dragon back in Korea. He helped Wei get off to a flying start as they actually took a 3-1 against Poker Face there. Now, for some reason, Poker Face moved almost completely away from the dive comps that had got them there in the first place, with Spince Pharah and Genji working amazing alongside Heiser's Winston. They just kind of tried to go to the more traditional comps, and once there, Wei were definitely the better team. And Top Dragon seemed to slot in just fine, seeming to be pretty capable of filling Who Are You's shoes. There in the next round though, we got our first appearance of a non-Korean team with Nightmare versus T1. And things did not go well for the team from North America as T1 beat them in a 3-0 sweep. At long last, T1 are looking like they've solved the issues that plagued them, and Skewed is genuinely looking like a pretty competent main support. His Brig was always amazing, right? But it turns out his Lucio is looking pretty solid as well. Zera continued to at least be a bright spot, but his efforts alone aren't enough for Nightmare to get much done there. On the other side, our European stars of Virtus Pro had an incredible showing against Wei, able to take a 3-0 win there and show the world that they deserve every ounce of respect they get. Peppy, who's been one of the best Sigma players in Korea, actually got just completely shut down by Vestola, and Jaewoo decided that Top Dragon hadn't felt enough pain from his time in EU, so he just decided to put down another beatdown on him, and Fixa just had a Briggy masterclass, proving that Fixa is still one of the best Korean main supports. Lee Soo-min just got diffed by him. Virtus Pro definitely came to play there, and I think looked very impressive. Now, after losing that match, Wei ended up getting a chance for redemption against Nightmare, and fortunately, they were able to earn it as they took a 3-0 win. Top Dragon ended up looking way better here, but it could just be because Nightmare were kind of uninspiring. That being said, it could just be an experience diff. Nightmare has players like Lethal and Kuffa who are pretty new to actually being on stage and playing for a crowd. So you can't blame them for maybe not playing up to their usual standards. That being said, hopefully Nightmare is able to come out from this looking stronger and without letting those results boom them, because at this point with the Champions Clash about to happen, that's the worst case scenario. Our grand finals saw a pretty hype matchup though, as Virtus Pro faced off against T1. And unfortunately for the Korea doubters, Virtus Pro got smoked, 4-0 for T1. This match was a little closer than the scoreline would imply, as Virtus Pro looked to be playing close the first couple maps, but after choking away the second map, Circuit Royale, they looked a little bit boomed after that. It didn't help matters that Donghak looked like the best tank in the world for this match, being absolutely dominant, especially with Hazard, which is crazy because that's not even his most known tank, right? And maybe more than anything, this is the match that proved to me that Skewed Vigilante might be goated. T1 may have cooked up a 5-star meal with this here. They were on fire, especially with Skewed leaning heavy into the break this match. It was rock solid. T1 have never looked better, and if they were ever going to be able to take a spot as one of Korea's top teams, this is their time to do it. Remember, they went to map 5 with Zeta while they had opener. So now, with this potential upgraded support line, there's a real chance. Anyway, that does wrap up the very exciting SOOP Cup, so last tournament I do want to quickly talk about is Calling All Heroes. We had the Academy 101 preseason tournament, which wrapped up, and while I'm not going to talk about each and every match here, I do want to give a quick shout out to our top teams from there, since it might be a good indication of who to watch out for there in the next stages. Now, first and foremost, my absolute GOATs, EXO Sakura, took a 4-0 win there in the grand finals, living up to at least my power rankings, and just all around showing some amazing stuff. The roster looks absolutely phenomenal. Mari was on fire in the tank role, Zoe had a pretty lights out performance on DPS, and overall everyone on the team just kind of locked in and it looked beautiful. Of course, that doesn't mean you should sleep on their opponents in the final, which was Fable, and they looked very strong in their own right, especially with the well-known names of Kindred and HG really, I think, leading the charge there. In fact, they were able to actually beat Timeless Ethereal, which is basically just the Nightmare Eclipse roster. And Nightmare Eclipse is the team that won Calling All Heroes Championship last year. It's basically the same people, and they did secure the 3rd place spot. And given their former results, there's no reason not to have good expectations for this team going forward. But for Fable to have beaten them 3-0 in the semifinals, that's a very impressive result from them. And, you know, Fable once had a kind of titanic status there in the Calling All Heroes scene, so maybe we're seeing a return to form there. Anyway, that finally wraps up all our tournaments and matches for the past couple weeks. So now, a few quick player and roster updates. First off, the biggest news, Violet has officially left Zeta Division. We talked about this one on the previous episode a bit, but it was technically speculation, since all Violet did was post an LFT. With this official confirmation though, I'm not gonna lie, it feels like we have more questions than answers. Like, who could possibly replace him? Is Alpha Yi going to play Lucio for them again? I don't think so. Is Violet staying in Korea? Is he just gonna go farm NA? Does Genji ditch Mag so Krusty can get his favorite student back? There are so many possibilities and so few answers. But what I do know is this. T1 should be salivating at the mouth, because with both Wei and Zeta getting rid of their star players, a top 3 finish for T1 is closer than ever for them. Next up though, the news for support player fans doesn't get much better, as Izayaki has actually officially announced his retirement. He was one of the best flex supports in the world at his peak, maybe even the best. Things just did not go his way after OWL ended, and it looks like his rough time on Fnatic last year ended up being the final straw for him. Nevertheless, he absolutely made his mark on the game, and I think a lot of people would definitely consider him a Hall of Famer basically on that support role there, right? So it sucks to see him go, but hopefully he can find fulfillment in wherever life takes him next. As one player retires though, another ends up returning, as EasyHan has announced that he is LFT again. He's been basically radio silent after OWL ended, and I think that is due to his military service, but anyone who watched APAC there in that final year will remember him from the Seoul Dynasty, and before that, the infamous 2022 APAC Valiant. He's a player that's had a lot of ups and downs, so I'm very curious to see how he'd manage now in this kind of new era of Overwatch. And speaking of new era though, we do have an announcement for them too, as MCD announces New Era's OWCS Stage 2 roster. For tank, we have Ruler and Roxy, DPS are Kane and Dodo, and support will be Blink and of course MCD. Archie is still on the team, but he will be coaching now. And this is basically just their SOOP Cup roster, but with Roxy added. Now, given their performance in said SOOP Cup, I don't know if that inspires a lot of hope, but time will tell. Now, outside of that region, Who Are You did officially join Gen G. Everyone saw it coming, but it is official now. Top Dragon ended up just kind of being traded for Who Are You. It'll be interesting to see if he's enough to elevate Gen.G to the level they need to kind of, compete with Virtus Pro, especially if we happen to move into a non-Genji meta. But Who Are You has been serviceable on all the flex DPS there in Korea, and serviceable in Korea potentially translates to just being amazing in EMEA, right? So I think there's a good chance that we see him pop off. And finally, a little bit of a leak here. Hitori of Calling All Heroes fame, and more recently from playing on Sakura Esports, will be joining Avidity over in North America. Now, this is kind of fascinating to me because it never really felt like tank play was a weak spot for them, and Pella especially had the ability to kind of serve as a wrecking ball specialist. I'm not sure how much of an upgrade Hitori will be, especially if she has to deal with like any ping or anything, but maybe it'll be the kick Avidity needs to show up big. Now we have our next up segment, and this is very short this week because really I don't even need to say it, but the Champions Clash is happening this weekend. You don't want to miss it, and if you don't know when the game you're looking for is, make sure you check out Wikipedia, because that is the site that will show you match dates and times in whatever your local time zone is. It's basically the most reliable way to keep track of the matches outside from just camping the Overwatch Esports channels, right? It saves you the trouble of having to convert things, and there's a countdown included right there, so super handy and definitely worth keeping an eye on. Anyway, that does bring this episode to a wrap. It's been an incredible couple weeks, to be sure. It's not often things get this packed. As always, though, links to everything I talked about can be found right down below, so check those out for any details. And feel free to join my Discord, which is also linked in the description, where we just talk about all things Overwatch Esports. We got a lot of exciting stuff that's happened here, and as the first quarter of the year comes to a close, we have one more great event to cap it off, so, do your best to catch it. But hey, even if you can't, there's no need to worry, because that's why I'll be here. Thank you all so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you all next time.